1974. The Clayton Assembly Line, 20 kilometres southeast of Melbourne. The last Astor radio rolls off the boxing station. The cabinet is stamped, "Made in Australia." The badge on the front is the streamlined Astor logo type, the same badge that had ridden shotgun in every Holland built at Fisherman's Bend from 1950 to 1971. The valves inside came from Sydney. The circuit board was assembled in Melbourne. The last hands to touch it belonged to a workforce that had, 3 years earlier, shifted from Grant Street, South Melbourne, to this Clayton plant, when the Grant Street factory was sold for demolition. Willem Sparrius watches the boxing station. 45 years after Radio Corporation Proprietary Limited was formed by a Melbourne accountant and a Melbourne wireless hobbyist in December 1929. Australian radio manufacturing ends. If you ever built a crystal set as a kid, apprenticed at Grant Street, or watched an Astor television flicker on in a Housing Commission lounge room in 1962, hit subscribe. This channel keeps these stories alive. Chapter 1. The last radio. The workers on the Clayton line know what today is. They have known for months. The job advertisements under Radio Corporation that had run in the Age and the Herald for years, for solderers, sprayers, wiring experts, product designers, plastic moulders, stopped abruptly in 1972. By early 1973, Radio Corporation had ceased to exist as a manufacturing advertiser in the Melbourne press. The Grant Street factory, the plant that had employed 1,200 people at peak, the plant that had built the Coast Watcher radios in 1942, was being demolished for a freeway extension. They have watched the shift patterns thin. They have watched the apprentices leave. At the last station of the boxing line, the last Astor radio moves under the tape. Streamlined Astor logo type, made in Australia stamp, wood veneer cabinet, 6 transistors, mains powered, medium wave and short wave dials. Willem Sparrius stands behind the packing benches. He is an EIL engineer. 3 years earlier, in 1971, he and Ian Maskiel designed and built 400 colour television sets under the Astor brand, Australia's first domestically engineered colour television, mothballed by a corporate decision from Eindhoven. The sets went to training rooms and technical schools. None ever reached a Melbourne showroom. Now the colour television is gone. The Grant Street plant is gone. The Clayton line is closing. The last radio is boxed. The tape is applied. The label is attached. 6 kilometres from Clayton, on Sturt Street in South Bank, the 9-storey Astor House still stands. Peter Spire design, 1959 construction. Wolfgang Sievers photographed it for the National Library of Australia in the year it opened. Today, the building is being emptied of its Radio Corporation function. Inside 3 years, Philips Australia will consolidate operations elsewhere. Inside 20, the building will be apartments. But this story does not begin at the end of the Clayton line in 1974. It begins in a Melbourne basement in 1923, when 2 men, one 23 years old and the other 31, started a wireless partnership that would become the largest Australian-owned electronics company of the 20th century. Chapter 2. The Boy from Chingford, 31st of July, 1899, Lower Clapton, East London. Arthur George Warner is born to Arthur Warner Sr., electrical engineer, and Emily née Cheeseman. Sir George Monod Grammar School, Chingford, the son of a tradesman climbing on scholarship. Editor of the school paper. Debating Club. A science degree begun at the University of London. Uncompleted. The Great War interrupts. Warner joins the Royal Naval Air Service, transferring to the Royal Air Force on its formation in April 1918. He rises to lieutenant. 1920. Demobilised at 21. Migrated to Australia under the Soldier Settler Scheme. An orchardist's block at Scottsdale in the Tasmanian northeast. 14th of August, 1920. 3 months after arriving, Warner marries schoolteacher Ethel Wakefield at Wesley Church, Melbourne. He qualifies as an accountant by correspondence while running the Tasmanian orchard. By 1923, Warner has left Tasmania. In February of that year, his Wireless Tasmania Proprietary Limited amalgamates with Louis Cohen Wireless, a small operation run out of the basement of the Louis Cohen tobacconist's shop at 63 Swanston Street, Melbourne. The founding partner Warner meets in that basement is Louis Henry Abrahams, 31 years old. Nephew of the Heidelberg School Art patron Louis Abrahams, an accomplished pilot with an aviation interest, 1926. The Astor brand of radios commences. The origin of the name is undocumented. 10th of December 1929. Radio Corporation Proprietary Limited is formed, Warner and Abrahams as joint first directors. They choose Radio Corporation to avoid confusion with America's RCA, Radio Corporation of America, which would sue anyone who used its acronym. 1933. Radio Corporation launches a 5-valve superhet, the size of a small book, mains-powered, priced within reach of Depression-era working families. The company markets it as the Mickey Mouse set. Mickey and Minnie images on the cabinet. Radio labelled for children. It sells like hotcakes. Sub-brands proliferate. Anodion picture tubes, anocap capacitors, Ferrocart vibrator units. The company adds Homecrafts Proprietary Limited, Eclipse Radio Proprietary Limited, and in 1938 forms Electronic Industries Ltd as a holding company. Directors: A. G. Warner, L. H. Abrahams, F. U. Clark, S. at Aarons. 1940. EIL goes public. Warner and Abrahams retained 50%. But before Astor could arm a nation for the Pacific War, before Grant Street could employ 1,200 people, before Warner could become Henry Bolte's kingmaker in the Victorian Legislative Council, an American cartoon mouse walked into the High Court of Australia. Chapter 3. Mickey Mouse in the High Court, 18th and 19th of May, 1937. The High Court of Australia sits in Melbourne. The case is Radio Corporation Proprietary Limited versus Disney and others. Full citation, 1937 Volume 57, Commonwealth Law Reports, page 448, case number HCA 38. The respondents: Walter E. Disney, Walt Disney Productions Limited, Walt Disney Enterprises, Walt Disney Mickey Mouse Limited. Radio Corporation has applied to register Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse as trademarks for radio receiving sets. The company has marketed its top-selling superhet as the Mickey Mouse Radio since 1933. The cabinet carries the mouse's image. Children's magazines carry the advertisements. The bench: Chief Justice Sir John Latham, Justice Rich, Justice Dixon, Justice McTiernan. 4 judges of the High Court of Australia. Counsel for Radio Corporation, Dean. Counsel for Walt Disney Productions, Fullagar KC with O'Brien. Disney's lawyer, Sir Robert Garran, argues that it is immoral and unethical for the Australian manufacturer to lift words which are the invention of Disney. 4th of August, 1937. Judgment, appeal, dismissed. Costs against Radio Corporation. Trademark registration refused. Chief Justice Latham, with Justices Rich and McTiernan, holds that the words Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse are so closely associated in the public mind with the Disney productions that their registration as trademarks by another party would be likely to deceive. Justice Dixon holds that the use is disentitled to protection under Section 114 of the Trademarks Act 1905-34. English precedent, Eno v. Dunn, 1890, unapplied. Radio Corporation removes the mouse. The image goes, the word goes. What remains is the phonetic residue. Astor, Mickey. sold under that name for the next 16 years. Read that again. An Australian manufacturer in Melbourne, employing 1,200 workers, is forced to abandon its top-selling product's branding by 4 High Court judges, applying English precedent to protect an American cartoon company. The first warning. Australian industry cannot resist American brand power. The country will spend the next 37 years learning it cannot resist European corporate power either. And in 1940, the year the Astor Mickey went to war under its new name, the Australian government asked Radio Corporation to arm the men who would defend the country from the Imperial Japanese Navy. Chapter 4. I Am Work. The Pacific War, 1940, Melbourne. The Department of Munitions places military wireless contracts with Radio Corporation. Warner, now 40 years old, RNAS and RAF veteran of the previous war, pivots the Grant Street plant to war production. Grant Street peaks at approximately 1,200 workers, women on the shop floor for the first time. The company produces military wireless sets, testing equipment, transformers and radar components. The Astor Wartime Wireless Catalogue is documented by the Kurrajong Radio Museum in New South Wales, the AR-12 for the RAAF in 1941, the WS-1008 Mark I and Mark II for the Army in 1941, the WS-208 Mark I for the Army in 1941, the AR-14, ATR-2B, ATR-2D, ATR-4A, ATR-R4B, and RC-8 for the Royal Australian Navy from 1942, the AR-17 and WS-108, Mark III in 1943, the wireless set number 22 Australian in 1944, the WS-208 Mark II in 1944, and the WS-122 for the Army in 1945. Radio Corporation is Australia's second largest wireless prime contractor of the war, behind only Amalgamated Wireless Australasia. Here's the thing. AWA built the larger teleradios that let the coast watchers signal the fleet. But the men who carried the sets on their backs through the New Guinea highlands carried Astor. The wireless set, 208, 6 valves, continuous wave only, 2.5 to 3.5 MHz, pack-carried, tropic designed, was reportedly used and favoured by commandos and coast watchers. Its frequency was chosen for tropical jungle operation. The wireless set number 22, Australian, 1944. A 13-valve tropic-sealed sender and receiver, possibly the world's first fully tropic-sealed radio. 3 to 5 miles voice range in jungle, 60 to 70 miles CW Morse in the open. Every solder joint, every valve socket sealed against the humidity that had corroded the WS-108 sets, to failure inside 6 months in New Guinea, designed for the men who would take back Bougainville, New Britain and Borneo. Astor's high-frequency backpack sets covered roughly 2.5 to 9 MHz, the frequency band the Pacific War was fought on. The coast watchers of the Ferdinand Network, Paul Mason and Jack Reed, operating from the ridgelines of Bougainville and the Northern Solomons, gave the United States Navy warning of Japanese air raids inbound to Henderson Field. Their transmissions helped turn the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942. Helped Alexander Vandergrift's Marines hold Henderson Field through the worst nights of October 1942. Some of the equipment they carried was Astor. Some of it was AWA. The distinction to a marine radio operator crouched in a Solomon Islands foxhole, listening for the drone of Betty bombers overhead, did not matter. By 1945, Grant Street has run at full capacity for 6 years. Reconversion to consumer radio begins in September. The women who had worked the shop floor returned to homes. The wireless sets that had spoken from jungle ridgelines to fleet carriers offshore go into surplus catalogues. The company that had built them prepares for peace. But 6,000 miles from Grant Street, in the occupied Netherlands, another radio company had been surviving the same war under very different circumstances. Chapter 5. The Righteous Man. 16th of April, 1905. Eindhoven, North Brabant. Frederick Jacques Philips is born. His uncle Gerard Philips had founded Philips Gloeilampen Fabrieken en Wacht, Philips incandescent lamp factories, in Eindhoven in 1891. His father Anton Philips joined the company in 1895. By 1940, the company is one of the largest radio, valve and lighting manufacturers in continental Europe. 10th of May, 1940. Germany invades the Netherlands. Rotterdam is bombed on the 14th. The Dutch army surrenders on the 15th. Arthur Seyss-Inquart is installed as Rijkskommissar for the occupied Netherlands. Anton Philips and most of the Philips board flee to the United States before the invasion completes. Fritz Philips is the only family board member to remain in the occupied Netherlands. The Philips Eindhoven works are declared a Rüstungswirtschaftliches Betrieb, a plant important to the German war industry. A German appointed Verwalter, custodian, is installed. The initial Verwalters are Philips' own German-based board members, Dr. O. Bormann and O. J. Merkel. Suspected by Berlin of accommodating the Philips family, they are replaced. September 1942. AEG executive Ludwig Nolte is installed as Verwalter, June 1943. AEG's Herbert Rohrer is given full powers by the German Air Ministry, while Fritz Philips is himself interned. Consumer output is cut to under 10%. Production is redirected to radio valves for the Wehrmacht. Deliveries to the Wehrmacht eventually reach roughly 75% of Philips' total output. An April 1942 German Air Ministry appraisal estimates that the Eindhoven plants are producing a third of the radio valves used in German military equipment. 6th of December 1942. The RAF launches Operation Oyster, a low-level daylight raid by 93 Mosquito, Ventura and Boston bombers against the Philips works at Eindhoven. The plants are damaged. 135 Dutch civilians of Eindhoven are killed by the bombing. A follow-up raid on the 30th of March 1943 damages the works again. The resistance side of the ledger. Fritz Philips arranges for approximately 469 Jewish employees to be classified as essential workers, shielding them from immediate deportation. The Philips Commando Workshop operates inside the Wout concentration camp, KZ Herzogenbusch, in North Brabant. 30th of May, 1943. Fritz Philips is himself arrested and interned at Wout after an April strike at the Eindhoven factory brings the plant's output to a halt. He is 38 years old. He is held for 113 days. 20th of September, 1943. He is released. The German administration concludes the plant runs better with him at his desk than in a barracks bunk. He returns to Eindhoven and to a company he no longer fully controls. 3rd of June, 1944, the Philips deportation. Jewish workers of the Philips Commando are transported from Wout to Auschwitz. Approximately 87 of the Philips employed Jew are killed in the camps in the months that follow. 382 survived the war. An 81% survival rate against an overall Dutch Jewish survival rate of approximately 25%. Of the roughly 140,000 Jews recorded in the Netherlands before the invasion, more than 100,000 were killed. And this is where it gets genuinely insane. The same Eindhoven plants that were shielding 382 Jewish workers from Auschwitz were, at the same time, producing 75% of their output for the Wehrmacht, including the radio valves used in Luftwaffe bomber navigation. the direction-finding equipment used across the Kriegsmarine and the field radio components used by Wehrmacht land forces. Read that again. Fritz Philips protected 382 Jewish workers. The factories those workers were assigned to made the valves that armed the Nazi war effort. Both are true. Both are documented. The moral arithmetic does not resolve, and it was not designed to. 5th of May, 1945. The Netherlands is liberated. A post-war Allied intelligence appreciation, the Combined Intelligence Objective Subcommittee report, describes Philips as successfully non-collaborators. The company's own historical position emphasizes resistance. The documented 75% Wehrmacht output emphasizes production. Fritz Philips returns to full leadership. He rebuilds the company. In 1961, he is elected president of Philips Gloeilampen Fabrieken en Vermaakbouw. He will hold that position for 10 years, the exact 10 years during which his company acquires Pye of Cambridge in 1966 and absorbs the Australian Electronic Industries Ltd in 1970. And on the 18th of July 1995, 22 years to the day after an Australian Prime Minister announced a tariff cut that would help destroy Fritz Philips' Australian subsidiary, Yad Vashem, in Jerusalem, officially recognised Frederick Jacques Philips as righteous among the nations. If you've made it this far, through the Coast Watchers, the Vervolters, the Voot Workshop, and the paradox of a man who saved 382 lives while his factories armed the Reich, hit the like button and subscribe. This channel keeps these stories alive. Payslip, photograph, or apprenticeship record from Grant Street or Clayton, drop it in the comments. Chapter 6, Grant Street Peak. 1945. War ends. Radio Corporation reconverts to consumer manufacturing. 1946. Warner enters the Victorian Legislative Council for Higginbotham Province as Independent Liberal, then Liberal. He will hold the seat for 18 years. Minister for Housing and Materials, 1947. Later, under Henry Bolte from 1955, State Development, Electrical Undertakings and Transport. Warner becomes Bolte's kingmaker, the industrialist politician who shapes Victoria's post-war electrification. Knighted KBE in 1963. 1940. Louis Henry Abrahams had died aged 49. Warner is the sole surviving founder. The 1950s. Astor is selected as a supplier of radios for General Motors Holden. The Astor badge sits in the dashboards of Holdens from Fisherman's Bend, from Woodville, from Elizabeth. September 1956. Australian television launches, TCN9 Sydney first, then GTV9 and HSV7, in time for the Melbourne Olympic Games in November. Astor is one of 5 domestic television manufacturers, with AWA, HMV, Chrysler and Admiral. Astor sets ship into Housing Commission flats, into Bolte's Melbourne, into every suburban lounge room from Broadmeadows to Frankston. The Astor television is not the market leader. It is the reliable middle, the set a working family could afford on a fitter's wage, on 12 months of hire purchase. 1959. Astor House opens on Sturt Street, South Bank. 9 stories, designed by Peter Speer, concrete raft on piles. The site was formerly swamp, glass curtain walls, sun hoods on the north face, ceramic veneers east and west. Wolfgang Sievers photographs it for the National Library of Australia. File reference NLA.OBJ-1603 73232. The building is the physical announcement that Radio Corporation has become an industrial empire. 1959, the same year. Pye of Cambridge Limited, chaired by Charles Orr Stanley, takes a controlling interest in Electronic Industries Ltd. Neither the workers at Grant Street nor the country reading The Age the next morning, fully understands what has just happened. Astor's cross-holdings under EIL, General Accessories, which owns Malvern Star bicycles from 1958. Eclipse Radio, with its Peter Pan, Pan and Monarch sub-brands. Homecrafts. The Empire employs several thousand across Melbourne, Sydney and Adelaide. From 1969 to 1971, EIL engineers Willem Sparrius and Ian Maskell design Australia's first domestically engineered colour television under the Astor brand. Approximately 400 units are built at Grant Street. They go to training rooms and technical schools across Victoria and New South Wales, never to a Melbourne showroom. Australia will not launch commercial colour television broadcasting until the 1st of March 1975, C-Day. Sparrius on the Grant Street laboratory floor, testing the colour prototype under fluorescent light. At the exact moment, Philips Eindhoven is finalising its second stage absorption of the parent company. Sparrius does not know that his employer is being sold, nor does Maskell. The engineers designing Australia's colour television future are the last generation to work for an Australian-owned electronics manufacturer. But the sale that killed Astor did not happen in Sydney or Melbourne or Adelaide. It happened in Cambridge, England, in 1959, and again in the House of Commons in London in 1966, and again in Eindhoven, Holland, in 1970. Chapter 7. The First Sale, 1959. Charles Orr Stanley, chairman of Pi of Cambridge Limited, secures a controlling interest in Electronic Industries Ltd. Pi Australasia Proprietary Limited is registered jointly by Pi Limited of England and EIL. Pi Melbourne holds approximately 40% of EIL. Warner remains a director. Strategic control has moved to Cambridge. The pattern is empire-wide. Post-war British electronics firms are buying Commonwealth manufacturers before the American giants can arrive. Pi is buying its Commonwealth position in Australia, in Canada, in India, in South Africa. Late 1960s. Pi of Cambridge is itself in financial trouble. Overinvested in Commonwealth expansion. Undercapitalised, facing German and Japanese competition on television sets. 1966. Philips Glühlampenfabriken. N5 of Eindhoven moves on Pi. The Dutch electronics giant wants Pi's British market position and its Commonwealth subsidiaries, including the Australian EIL stake. The decision point is the United Kingdom Minister of Technology, Tony Benn. Labour, Bristol, South East. Later a symbol of British democratic socialism. Benn determines that a full Philips acquisition of Pi would create a de facto United Kingdom electronics monopoly. His ruling, Philips may acquire only 60% of Pi. The Lowestoft factory must continue to manufacture televisions in Britain. Philips gains majority control. Pi Holdings Limited is formed in 1967. C.O. Stanley resigns from Pi. Philips will not buy Pi outright until 1976. The unintended consequence, Philips now has a legal pathway to Electronic Industries Ltd via Pi Melbourne's 40% stake. Tony Benn's monopoly prevention ruling in London has 6 years later created the corporate architecture for the destruction of Astor in Melbourne. Fritz Philips is president of Philips Eindhoven throughout, from 1961 to 1971, the exact decade in which the two-stage acquisition unfolds. 1969. Herman Huyer arrives in Australia from the Netherlands. Dutch-born, aged 49, appointed Managing Director of Philips Australia. Huyer will remain in the role through the 1970s. And in 1970, Philips Australia, under new Managing Director Herman Huyer, absorbed all of Electronic Industries Ltd and its subsidiaries. Radio Corporation Proprietary Limited, the company that had armed the Coast Watchers in 1942, was now a subsidiary of Philips Industries Holding Ltd of Eindhoven. Chapter 8. Absorption, 1970. Philips Australia absorbs Electronic Industries Ltd in full. By 1969, EIL was in major financial difficulty, significant losses. It was also, under a 1967 8-year contract, a major buyer of Philips Australia components, television picture tubes above all. The corporate calculus is documented in the Philips Company archives at Eindhoven. If EIL collapsed, the failure would cascade via Pi Melbourne, via Pi Cambridge back to the Eindhoven parent. Philips decides that Philips Australia has to absorb EIL to prevent the cascade. 1970. Philips Australia absorbs all of EIL's employees and subsidiary companies. Radio Corporation Proprietary Limited, the company Warner and Abrahams founded in Melbourne in December 1929, becomes a subsidiary of Philips Industries Holdings Limited. Philips Australia employs 13,000 people in 1970. Let that number sit for a moment. 13,000 people in one Dutch-owned Australian subsidiary. Warner is not there to see it. He died on the 3rd of April 1966, myocardial infarction at Seymour, aged 66, 7 weeks after Australia decimalised its currency. State funeral. Estate sworn for probate at $557,815. Herman Huyer is Managing Director. He arrived in Sydney the previous year with a mandate from Eindhoven to consolidate the Australian operations. 1971. Grant Street manufacturing shifts to Clayton. The Grant Street plant, 1,200 workers at peak, Coastwatcher radios in 1942, first colour television prototypes in 1971, begins wind down. The land is sold. The buildings will be demolished within the decade for the extension of the freeway system. The plant that had employed Melbourne migrants and returned soldiers and school leavers for 40 years is emptied over 18 months. The transfer to Clayton is presented publicly in Philips Australia statements to The Age as consolidation. It is, in fact, preparation for closure. 1972. The job advertisements under Radio Corporation for solderers, product designers, sprayers, wiring experts and plastic moulders, previously placed by the hundreds in The Age and the Herald, abruptly stop. Miss Hurley, the Grant Street organiser, whose name appears in the last of the recruitment notices. Mr. Wood, the Clayton contact. These are the last administrative names attached to Radio Corporation in the Melbourne press. Early 1973. Radio Corporation has ceased to exist as a manufacturing advertiser. And on Wednesday, the 18th of July 1973, at 7 o'clock in the evening, Australian Prime Minister Gough Whitlam went on national television to finish what Philips had already started. Chapter 9. 18 July 1973. 18th of July 1973. 7 o'clock in the evening. Canberra, Prime Minister Gough Whitlam and Trade Minister Jim Cairns announced jointly an immediate 25% across-the-board cut to all Australian import tariffs. Effective midnight. The Prime Ministerial Transcript, number 2971, reads, "Each tariff will be reduced by 1/4 of what it is now. This reduction will apply forthwith." Pre-cut tariffs. Clothing at 55%, motor vehicles at 45%, consumer electronics at various category rates. The cut is designed to fight 14% inflation by allowing cheaper imports. The immediate impact. Australian consumer electronics manufacturing, already under severe Japanese competitive pressure, has its tariff shield removed overnight. Here's the thing. The Astor wind down had already been in motion for 2 years. Grant Street had shifted to Clayton in 1971. Radio Corporation had ceased advertising for staff by early 1973. Whitlam's tariff cut did not start Astor's death. What it did was give Herman Huyer, Philips Australia's managing director, the public reason to blame someone else. Huyer features in Australian press coverage across late 1973 and 1974, citing the tariff cut as the reason for staged layoffs. The corporate decision had been made in Eindhoven months earlier. Economist Alex Milmo of Federation University, writing on the 50th anniversary of the cut, over the next 7 years, manufacturing employment fell by 80,000. 15 months after the 25% tariff cut, fewer than 6,000 people had claimed the wage replacement. And for 4 years, from July 1973 to December 1981, the workforce at Clayton built the last Astor products anyone would ever build. And then a small division in a Melbourne warehouse pressed the last Astor records anyone would ever hear. Chapter 10. The 4-Year Funeral, late 1973 to 1974. Radio production at Clayton winds up. 1974. The last Astor radio rolls off the Clayton line. Philips Australia begins importing radios from Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong and Singapore under the Philips badge, and briefly under a hollow Astor import label until 1975. Small television and component production follows the radios. Astor refrigeration and Astor freezers are advertised until 1975, then discontinued. 1975. The Astor name becomes a badge on imported goods. Then it disappears from consumer electronics entirely. Willem Sparrius and Ian Maskiel, the engineers who designed Australia's first colour television, have no successor role at Philips Australia. Their names disappear from the corporate record. Employment at the Philips Hendon plant in Adelaide falls from approximately 3,500 workers to 250 by 1979. 1980. The Hendon plant is sold. But one small division survived the manufacturing collapse. Astor Records, the recording division launched around 1960, was through the 1970s one of Australia's Big Seven music distributors. It held local distribution for Motown, Elektra, MGM Verve, Casablanca, Buddha, Mercury and MCA. Chart success with Kiss and Donna Summer. The Seekers. Mark II from 1975. Marcia Hines. July 1980. An Australian-Italian singer named Joe Dolce records a novelty song called Shut Up You Face for the Astor label with Full Moon Records. Here's the kicker. By February 1981, Shut Up You Face is Australia's best-selling single ever. 290,000 copies, surpassing Mike Brady's Up There Kazali record of 260,000. It reaches number 1 in 15 countries. Estimated total worldwide sales, 6 million copies. The last cultural artefact ever produced under an Astor imprint is a novelty single that outsells every other Australian record in history. October 1981, Polygram takes over Astor Records. 31st of December 1981, the Melbourne facility closes. Astor Records ceases to exist. 52 years and 21 days after Radio Corporation Proprietary Limited was formed on the 10th of December 1929, and on the 18th of July 1995, 13 years, 6 months and 18 days after the last Astor record was pressed at Clayton, Yad Vashem in Jerusalem officially recognized Frederick Jacques Philips as righteous among the nations. Chapter 11, 18 July. Walk down Sturt Street, South Bank today. Look up, 9 stories, glass curtain walls, sun hoods on the north face, ceramic veneers east and west. Peter Spear's clean modernist lines, cluttered now with added balconies. The building is called the City View Complex. It is apartments. It was converted in the early 1990s. There is no heritage plaque. There is no marker to indicate that this was Astor House, the headquarters of the largest Australian-owned electronics manufacturer of the 20th century. Wolfgang Sievers photographed this building in 1959. His negatives sit in the National Library of Australia. File reference nla.obj +603732232. The residents who take their morning coffee on the added balconies do not know whose building they are living in. 6 kilometres away, at 126 Grant Street, South Melbourne, where 1,200 workers assembled the WS-208 backpack radios that the Coast Watchers carried through New Guinea, where the Astor Mickey Superhead came off the line in 1933, where the 400 Willem Sparrius colour television sets were framed and tested in 1971, there is nothing. The factory demolished for freeway exits. Grant Street itself partly disappeared. A small park with the yellow peril sculpture stands where the loading dock used to be. Willem Sparrius, Ian Maskiel, the solderers and sprayers and wiring experts of Miss Hurley's job advertisements, the last generation to build Australian radios under an Australian badge, are absent from every plaque in Southbank. Their names are in the Age archives, in Radio Corporation staff photographs held by the State Library of Victoria, in the personal collections of a few surviving amateur radio operators. They are not on any wall. Lesson 1. Corporate structure is a one-way trap. Charles Orr Stanley bought a controlling stake in Electronic Industries Ltd for Pi of Cambridge in 1959, a straightforward Commonwealth industry consolidation. 7 years later, Tony Benn permitted Philips of Eindhoven to buy 60% of Pi in London, a monopoly prevention ruling. 4 years after that, Philips Australia absorbed all of EIL in Melbourne, a cascade prevention decision made in the Netherlands. 3 years after that, Whitlam cut Australian tariffs by 25% in Canberra, a domestic anti-inflation measure. No single decision was designed to destroy Astor. Each was defensible in its own context. Together, across 15 years and 3 hemispheres, they dismantled the largest Australian-owned electronics manufacturer of the 20th century. Corporate structure is a one-way trap. Once you sell the controlling stake, you cannot buy it back. Lesson 2. Patriotic debt is real. In 1942, in the jungles above Rabaul and along the coasts of the Solomons, Australian commandos and coast watchers carried Radio Corporation transceivers, the WS-208, 6 valves, 2.5 to 3.5 megahertz. Pack carried, tropic sealed. Their transmissions helped the United States Navy find the Japanese fleet at the Battle of the Coral Sea and at Guadalcanal. 32 years later, in 1974, a Dutch multinational that had during the same war produced radio valves for the Wehrmacht at 75% of its Eindhoven output wound up the Australian factory that had built the WS-208. The patriotic debt of 1942 was cancelled by a corporate decision in 1970. It has not been repaid. It has been forgotten. Lesson 3. The righteous man can also be the one who signs the papers. On the 18th of July, 1995, Yad Vashem in Jerusalem officially recognized Frederick Shucks Phillips as righteous among the nations for saving 382 Jewish workers during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. The same Fritz Phillips, from 1961 to 1971, was president of Philips Gloeilampen Fabrieken N.V., the corporate entity that acquired Pi of Cambridge in 1966 and absorbed Electronic Industries Ltd of Melbourne in 1970. He was 90 years old on the day of the Yad Vashem ceremony. He would live another 10 years until the 5th of December 2005. History does not present its actors as heroes or villains. It presents them as people who signed papers. Some of those papers saved 382 lives. Some ended a Melbourne industry. Both bear the Palm signature. 18th of July 1973, the tariff cut. 18th of July 1995, the Yad Vashem recognition. 22 years to the day, same date, different hemispheres. Read that again. Same date, different hemispheres. The company that survived Nazi occupation later dissolved the Australian radio maker that armed the Pacific War against fascism. The man who saved 382 Jewish workers led the company that dissolved a Melbourne empire. Astor House is apartments. Grant Street is a freeway exit. The wireless set 208 sits in the Kurrajong Radio Museum in New South Wales. The 400 Willem Sparrius colour television sets are scattered, some in private collections, some scrapped, most lost. Joe Dolce's Shut Up You Face, the last cultural artefact ever pressed on the Astor label, still plays on Classic Hits Radio, 45 years after it was recorded in July 1980. 52 years and 21 days. The company that armed the Coast Watchers in 1942 was dissolved by the company that armed the Wehrmacht in 1944. She's a beauty.